right, so we've talked about how to prepare for a horse, how to meet your goals with a horse, and where to find horses. So the question is, how do you make that selection? What do you need to be paying attention to for actually choosing a horse? So when you go, when you've identified from one of these places a horse that you'd really like to go take a look at, done some homework ahead of time, you want to schedule a meetup. Take a horse savvy friend or a trainer that can be a second set of eyes, or at the very least a second set of eyes, even if they're not horse savvy, because somebody may pick up what you're missing. Ask to watch the horse being caught in the pasture, not that they're just already out and saddled. You want to see what that's like. You want to know what you're in for in terms of their personality. That's going to tell you a lot about personality and how easy they are to catch. When the horse is brought in, you want to touch them all over. You want to feel for any abnormalities and watch the horse to pick up on any behavior cues if there's places they're uncomfortable. You want to watch the owner handle the horse so that you can kind of see that from the outside. You're going to pick up on more stuff watching them. And then you want to watch them ride first. If they're not willing to get on their horse, you probably don't want to get on that horse. And then handle them on the ground as well. You want to lead them and interact with them so that you get a sense of your relationship and what those behaviors are. When a horse is used to somebody, it's going to be a little different than when you're coming to it new. And then you do want to take that test ride if they're saddle trained to double check that you're going to communicate well with this horse and that their training really is what it looks like it is. All right, next slide. So a few terminologies real quick that'll come up in these slides that we're about to talk about. And many of these you may know, but in case some you don't. Green is a term that can vary pretty wildly. So this can mean anything from they're untouched to they're just halter broke to they've had a saddle on to they've been riding a few times or they've been riding quite a bit, but they're still learning. So you want to clarify with somebody what green means to them probably before you get to this meetup stage. Halter broke means that the only training they've had is being able to put a halter on, maybe do some leading. Saddle broke, they've learned how to carry a rider in a saddle. The extent of that is going to vary depending on what else you can find out about them, but they've at least gotten to that stage of being able to be comfortable with the saddle on. Sound, they move evenly in all of their legs and aren't exhibiting any lameness. Grade means don't know the breed. An OTTB, off the track thoroughbred, usually, but not always, that means they're a former racer. Sometimes they can have been trained to race, but never actually performed in a race. Bomb-proof generally is supposed to mean that they're comfortable in any situation and they're not reactive under stressful or new conditions. Again, the extent of that can be varied, and you want to verify that for yourself, what that means. Next slide, thanks. Loads, if you see that in an ad or hear that from a person, means they get in a trailer. You want to verify that they do that well and comfortably. Stands for the farrier or for trimming, or the phrase they're good with his or her feet means they don't try to kick the farrier. This is important. You need a good relationship with your farrier or dance around when they're getting their hoofs trimmed, because farriers will drop you if your horse is too much trouble and they need their feet trimmed frequently. So you want to have a good relationship there. Hands high, or you'll sometimes see that abbreviated as just an H or HH. That's how we measure horse height. I believe it's about 4 inches. It's basically a sideways hand. Ponies under a certain height, they'll do in inches. And then above, I think it's above 13 hands is technically a horse, and below is a pony. 14.2? 14.2. Really? Okay. Papered, or you see the phrase registered, means that they know the lineage and it's recorded with an official breed registry or organization. So if that's important to you to follow their bloodlines, some horses will have that paperwork, and you'll make sure you get those from the owner. AQHA in this region is one of the most popular breed registries that you'll see, and it means American Quarter Horse Association. And in your pocket, again, a phrase people like to use when there's a friendly horse who likes attention and affection. All right, next slide. Hand that over.
Sorry. No, you're good. So I'm going to start off these next couple of sections with a general blanket statement that when in doubt, err on the side of caution. One thing we do recommend, or what I see a lot is recommended, is a pre-purchase exam. and I would suggest that you contact your veterinarian to get in touch with you for this pre-purchase exam. And the reason I say that is because you have that relationship built up with your veterinarian. They're going to be straight with you. They're going to say exactly what they think. You know, if you get a pre-purchase exam notes from another vet that you're unfamiliar with, that could be, you know, just as risky. But the first couple things we're going to talk about are a body condition score, or BCS. I have a little chart up here. It's a little hard to see, but typically you might see these ranges either between 1 and 5 or 1 and 9. The one that I'm familiar with here, again, I apologize that it's a little blurry for you here in the room, but 1 through 9 is what we're going to look at today. 1 being extremely emaciated and 9 being extremely overweight. Your general body condition score that you're looking for is a 4 to a 5. That's kind of right in the middle line. You know, you might not be able to see the ribs, but you can easily palpate and feel them. There are some caveats to this, meaning if you have horses with certain requirements of them, meaning if you have a breeding mare, she might be a 6 or a 7, just to be able to keep a little bit more weight for a healthy growing foal. Whereas, you know, a performance horse might be closer to a 4 or a 5. If you see ribs or, you know, a few extra bones, it might not necessarily mean that they're underweight. There are a lot of underlying health conditions that can factor into this as well. But typically, like I said, around the 4 to 6 range is kind of what you're looking at. Sorry, I wish you could see those pictures a little bit better, but that's typically what you're looking for in that. Another thing we want to look for is opaque or white or any sort of nasty looking nasal discharge, which could be indicative of a respiratory infection or disease. Whether this is contagious or not, it is definitely something to get evaluated in that pre-purchase exam. If it is contagious, you could be bringing all of your other horses at the facility at risk if you don't have proper quarantine set up. And even if it's not contagious, this could lead further down the line to more respiratory infections and issues for that horse as well. So that's something you really want to have covered in that pre-purchase exam. Coat and skin condition are another big one here. This picture that you see here is actually an example of a horse with Cushing's. You can see kind of in the background of this photo, it looks like maybe a summer setting, but around this horse's belly and legs and neck, they have very long hair. That is one of the telltale signs for Cushing's disease, which is it's a chronic issue with these horses that they can't shed their coat, but it also is an insulin resistant. So again, that goes back to making sure you're checking up on their diet and their grazing options as well. Another thing in their coat and skin condition is you want it to look healthy. You want it to be shiny. You don't want it to look dull or rough. Anything that's soft and shiny is perfect, what you're looking for. There are some skin conditions where, if you want to go ahead to the next slide, we'll talk about those as well. Oh, whoops, it might have been on the next slide after this. That's okay, we'll come back to that. So there are a few other skin conditions, including rain rot, ringworm. Again, if anything just looks abnormal with your horse's skin or coat, that's something to definitely get looked at in your pre-purchase exam. On this slide here, one thing you want to look for too is lethargy. This could be indicative of a lot of things, other underlying health conditions. Maybe they're underweight and just don't have the energy. Could be due to their age. So again, pre-purchase exam. Sores, cuts, and scars. There are a few that you can kind of differentiate between whether it's a superficial scar or cut or sore versus if it's something a little bit rooted more deeper, meaning it could be a source of infection. You could see other signs such as redness, swelling, and heat. You might want to be able to hopefully determine if it's an old injury or new. That could be a question for the person that's selling the horse, but again, that is not a guaranteed answer, as we've already seen in some of those horse listings. So again, just to consult with your vet on those as well if you're unsure. Small nodules, especially around the eyes and the anus, especially on grays and fair-skinned horses. They could be nothing, or it could be signs of cancer, especially with those fair-skinned horses if they don't have the proper sun protection. I believe it was Valkyrie who has a skin condition on her shoulder, so you'll see that once we go outside. Who on the white part of her paint pattern, she had a lot of exposure to the sun and some maybe underlying skin conditions to where you can still see it's affecting her today, not in such the way that it affects her riding or her demeanor, but it has changed the general structure of her skin condition. So yeah, all good things to kind of look for, excuse me, and consult with your vet on those. Another thing to look for is hoof health. So this is something that If you don't have a vet involved, you could also get in touch with your farrier. Kind of like what Jana mentioned too, you always want to make sure you can see that horse track around and make sure what we call they look sound. Ponies, especially here in this description here, they are more prone to founder or get laminitis, which is basically a description of when the inner bone within the hoof separates from that soft tissue in the hoof structure along the hoof wall, and it'll start to rotate down over time. It can protrude through the bottom of their foot, so it is a very, very painful condition if they get to that point. But there are ways to mitigate that and to treat those as well to keep them as comfortable as possible. But you can see in this picture here, this horse kind of leaning back off those front feet, most likely to relieve some of that pressure on their front end. So again, just a couple signs you might want to look for. And we'll move along to conformation.
So when people are looking for a horse, a lot of times they think, oh, well, I want to do jumping, so I want a warm blood. Or, oh, I can't jump with a quarter horse. That's weird. And you may or may not actually want to do show jumping. Like maybe you just want to do little low-level stuff, but you don't think that you can look at this horse because it's not the right breed. It's not what you've always seen doing that. But what gives a better indication of a horse's aptitude for things than breed is its conformation. So, one of the most diverse breeds is a quarter horse, also the most common breed, can look like, there's a whole spectrum of what it can look like. They can look almost like a thoroughbred, or they can be as wide as they are tall, in a good way. They're stocky. So a good conformation will give a good indication of a horse's longevity and how their joints and their tendons and how their legs are going to maintain over time. Their athleticism, what they'll be good for, and how good they'll be at it. Soundness and training aptitude. One of the main thing that you should look for is symmetry. So are they the same on the left and the right? This can show, a proportionate horse should be symmetrical on both sides, and if they're not, it can promote excess stress on certain joints and ligaments. And it's usually an indicator that there's something off somewhere. So if a horse has a hip out, then that whole diagonal, that, if its right hip is out, then its left shoulder and right hip will suffer and likely not be the same as the right shoulder and the left hip. So the neck should be about 1/3 of the horse's total body, which allows the horse to be more flexible and balanced, collect more naturally, use their body in a better way. If their shoulders are nice and wide, it can allow for a better lung capacity, better breathing rate. The shoulder slope right here should have an angle between 40 and 55 degrees. So the steeper the angle, the more upright and shorter stride the horse's movement is, which can be ideal in certain disciplines like high jumping, where you want the horse to have that elevation in the front end. If it's more angled out like that, then they're going to have a longer, really loftier gait, which you might want in something like pleasure. Next. Chest and ribs, so a wide chest allows for a greater lung capacity. The back should have a well-formed wither, which allows the saddle to sit nicely on its back. They're a lot easier to fit saddles on as well. Not too tall withers, but well-formed. A shorter back provides more strength for carrying a rider. They will have a lot less soreness back here. The hindquarters, a longer hindquarters increases extension and flexion, so you'll see more of that longer stride. The shorter hindquarters can provide power and support. The croup right here should be about the same height as the withers. Another thing you see in this figure is that if you draw a circle around the shoulders, the barrel, and the hindquarters, all of our circles are about the same size. And different breeds have different conformational standards, but that's kind of something to look for if your horse is really off in one area or the other that you're looking at. You might question a little bit. Another thing is if you draw a line from this group to the point of buttocks right here, the more angled this line is, the more the horse is going to have an aptitude towards sitting on its haunches. So a lot of Western horses have a very sloped croup right here because they get down the work for cows and stuff like that, whereas a jumping horse has a more elevated point of buttocks, and that can allow for more power going over jumps and stuff like that. So a lot of English horses you'll see have a much less sloped hindquarters than Western horses. Legs. So if you look directly in the front or directly in the back, you should see the horse's legs coming directly down from the point of shoulders, be able to draw a line through its front legs all the way to the ground. Straight lines, so you don't want their knees inward, outward. With the hocks, you'll hit a little bit, start from the point of buttocks, hit a little bit of the outside of the hocks, and then straight through to the middle of the hooves. And that's, if the horse's legs are nice and under itself, they should also move in a straight line and not paddle or wing their legs. So winging is when they bring their legs kind of at an arc in, and paddling is coming out. Check for symmetry between joints. Make sure one knee's not bigger than the other. The hocks. Pastern and hoof angles right here. So this should also be about 40 to 55 degrees. A longer pastern is going to provide a more smooth ride, but it will be more wear and tear on that horse's joint. And a nicely sloped hoof will transfer weight from the tendons to the upper leg. So out from here and bring it more up to the muscles, which decreases pressure on the tendons and maintains soundness. You can also see you actually want the hoof angle to be about the same as the pastern angle, and that'll put the horse's balance and support. Also, if you draw a line down the center of the horse's leg right here, you should reach the back of the hoof. And that's a good length for a pastern. Next. Lameness and mobility. Always ask the owner for lameness history. They'll probably have a better idea of what the horse has been through. Hopefully they'll be honest with you, but be sure, if they're like, oh, it's just, that horse just started being lame today, or they do this sometimes, they'll walk it off in 10 minutes. Always get a pre-purchase exam, especially if you're worried about any lameness that you see. Ask the horse to walk, trot, canter in both directions, and look for even gaits. Notice if one stride is a little bit less than the other, how each leg tracks, any stiffness in any joints in the hind end or the fore end, any dragging of toes or like stomping of feet. These all can be a sign of lameness, and most soundness issues actually stem from the hoof and lower leg. So some common lameness that you'll see. Oh, this horse just has ring bone. What ring bone is arthritis buildup of the lower or upper pastern joints. This is the lower and the upper. And a lot of times if you feel down the horse's leg, you'll feel a lump or a ring around those joints. If caught early and maintained, you can find therapies to help the horse maintain some soundness. Also, if the joint is fused, if it gets so arthritic that the joint fuses, then the horse is not in pain from that anymore. But a lot of times if they have ring bone in one, they may have ring bone in another, depending on the reason for that ring bone. This x-ray was taken off of one of our horses, and you can see he has calcification around this joint right here. And his ring bone was too far gone, and after about a year of trying to help him, we ended up having to euthanize him. Next. Another reason, which Liz already touched on a little bit, is laminitis, which is a weakness of the lamina in this hoof that holds up the coffin bone. It can be extremely painful. It's usually only in the front hooves, and it can be caused by excessive pounding, too much rich food, or stress. Founder is when this coffin bone actually rotates and points down. So this is what Liz was talking about, where it separates from the hoof of the wall and can actually point down and rotate through the bottom of the hoof. It can result in euthanasia, or sometimes horses can come back from it. This horse is another horse. This x-ray is from another horse that we have. And so you want the front of the coffin bone to be parallel with the front of the hoof. And so as you can see, we do have some rotation here. There's actually, they call it a ski tip. There's actually some deformation of the coffin bone where it swoops out. So that's from extra pressure hitting the ground. You can also see one indication of a horse that's foundered, if you're looking, is they may have a swoop in the front of their feet, which Cayenne does as well. She is leaning towards soundness. She's doing better. So next slide. And then the third one that I'll talk about is navicular. And a way you can tell a horse has navicular is they want to kind of be on their tiptoes. And that's because navicular is kind of a general term for any inflammation or degradation in the navicular bone, which is down here. And this is diagnosed through x-rays. This is another one of our horses. And so she wasn't necessarily navicular of the bone, but she had extreme mineralization of this navicular tendon. And that could have been caused, you can see her hooves are way too overgrown and broken back, which was putting a lot of pressure on these connecting and supporting ligaments in the back of her leg. And that could have been a cause for her navicular. In the end, we did end up having to euthanize her. Next. Other common reasons for lameness are joint and tendon issues. So the way you can do this, just feel up and down the horse's legs for any lumps, bumps, any enlarged or swollen joints, whether it's soft or hard, are all a reason for concern. Check along the back for any indication of soreness or pain. So that's just running your hand down, putting some pressure along the back, paying attention if you see any muscle twitching, any reaction from the horse. They don't like that, or they're shifting around. And then pay extra attention to the SI region. That can frequently cause pain in riding horses. So looking at different breeds, there's kind of two different bases. Right? We have hot-blooded horse and cold-blooded horses. Hot-blooded horses tend to be a lighter build. They have more energy. They usually like to go. They can go for longer periods of time. And these breeds include kind of thoroughbreds, Arabians, and then you have the cold-blooded horses. And these are lower energy, the gentle giants, the Clydesdales, the Shigers. They're bred for, pulling plows, not running races. Warm-blooded horses came from a mix of hot and cold-blooded horses. So warm-blooded horses are pretty much all other breeds, including quarter horses, warm bloods, Tennessee Walkers, Missouri Foxtrotters, etc. Holsteiners, they're all warm bloods. So some breeds are known for greater longevity, soundness, and health, such as Arabians. Arabians are known for their long lifespan. Mustangs are known for soundness, which Mustangs are kind of a mix of everything. But like thoroughbreds are kind of known to be a little more delicate. They can have, they can run into a little bit more health problems. But it's typically more important to judge a horse on a case-by-case basis rather than only look at one certain breed, because they can have different conformations, they can have different personalities, and they can have different health issues. And then, grade. A horse can be pure blood and still be grade. Grade is just a term for a horse that does not belong to a registry and whose lineage cannot necessarily be tracked. So if they're not part of a registry, then technically they're graded. They're grade. Okay, next. Yeah.
Thank you. Also, grading comes from if people lost their papers and can't find them or prove that they were the owner and get them back.
Yeah, then they like sell them.
Yep, it's the black in the last slide is actually my personal horse who came through the rescue. He was a registered Arabian, but I guess we don't know where his papers are, so I guess he's great now. All right, so another thing to think about, some people have a strong preference for mares or geldings, and we'd love to tell you all about it. So we're gonna play a little game. Here's a horse that is being ridden bareback in a halter, is standing quietly while the owner is messing around on their phone. What do you think, mare or gelding?
Mare.
Based on what you know.
Gelding. Impossible to tell.
Impossible to tell. All right, I will let you know that this is a mare. Here's a horse that was doing fine with a training exercise and then suddenly just decided they needed to push into their trainer and be wackadoo. Mare or gelding?
Totally a mare.
Right. A lot of people will say, it's acting all nice and calm, and of course that's a gelding. Oh, it's being a little bit crazy in the head. Oh, it must be a mare, right? People have this thought. All right, next slide. It's a prejudice that's out there. All right, so here's a profile of a horse, and I want you to tell me if you think, which horse do you think this might belong to? So it's a horse that's very calm and sweet on the ground, but can tend to be pushy. Is green broke under saddle, but knows their basics, and will sometimes test their rider and go into a random bucking spree. Which horse do you think we're talking about here?
Hey.
I'm actually talking about both horses. This profile matches both of these. This is a 4-year-old mare who was recently starting to stand on, and this is a 20-year-old gelding. That profile matches either. So the prejudices that are out there, mare or gelding, don't necessarily imply. In fact, I can tell you that this mare got along a lot better with her pasture mates than this gelding. He's very hard to find buddies for in the field. So that prejudice about mare or gelding is kind of an old myth. Next slide. And so you'll hear a lot of people saying, oh, you only want a gelding, don't deal with mares. But it really has a lot more to do with their temperament and their training. Mares will go through heat cycles. It doesn't often affect them. And it's something that training can potentially deal with. So it's generally much less of a problem than people make it out to be. But also geldings, you have to clean their sheath, and that's a lot of fun. So there's drawbacks to geldings too. So both have their positives and negatives, but in the end, it's really on an individual basis. One note that I will make about stallions and studs is to know that many boarding facilities won't allow them. You'll hear people talk about having a very sweet, handleable stallion. They can be aggressive, so they're really not recommended for beginners. But also, even if you have a very sweet stallion, if you take them into a place where there are mares, or if they were to get loose, there's a lot of liability there, and potential for danger and hazards. So generally recommend against stallions and studs, especially for first-time owners. Age. This is another place where, a lot of people want that young horse, but there's some advantages to the older horses as well. Again, there's a give and take here. So most horses will generally live into their late 20s if they've had proper care. This can vary a lot. Some can longer than that. You never know when an epidemic or something might take them younger, but that's a general expectation. And many horses are rideable well into their, so Arabian 23, and she's 4-H, doing row, she's doing barrels and poles, she's doing jump, right? And just 23. So to count the older horses, they still have a lot to give. Not only that, but they have experience. So especially if you're starting, it's to look, because they might take care of you a little better, and they need the homes. But they also may need a little extra care, and that's going to be dependent on what kind of time you have and expense that you want to put into them. And we'll talk about that a little later too. Younger horses, I say it's great. You can have a nice long time with them. They can be a little more testy and spooky because they're just newer to the world, right? So they need more exposure to things. So you need to be prepared as your lifestyle to be able to give them that to them, and consistency of work. So general rule of thumb, when you're looking at these younger, all the way younger is not necessarily better. Horses really shouldn't be started under saddle until they're about 3, and that's started. So a lot of people start their horses younger than that at 2, but they're not done growing, and they haven't grown enough yet to be able to support that weight and even have the psychological maturity sometimes to deal with that training. And then they shouldn't be worked hard until 6, because that's when they're finally done growing, when they've grown all the way in. So when you're looking at horses, thinking about those goals and what you want to do with them. So for example, I took my daughter, we're looking for a step-up horse. We went to a racehorse retraining facility, and there's some lovely 4-year-olds. They were nice and calm, but they were 4, and that was something that they explained, and we talked through a little bit. She wanted to do jumping and start doing high jumps. They're like, you're going to have to wait 2 years before you really start putting the jumping work into him. And that for us as a family, she didn't want to wait. So we passed up on the horses. We didn't adopt one and then work them hard. We decided that wasn't for our family. So if you really want to start now with some of your harder riding goals, make sure they're probably over 6. And when it comes to age, care and lifestyle can mean a lot more for longevity than just age. So again, don't pass over some of those older horses just because of that number. You want to ask for that owner history to know kind of what their background has been, because that can really give you a better indicator. Next slide. So maintenance. So when it comes to what it takes to kind of keep a horse, not just pasture and hay, you want to ask an owner, what are they currently eating? You don't want to suddenly change their feed when you take them home. So both kind of what kind of hay are they on? Are they on alfalfa, grass, a mix? Are they just out on pasture? Do they take any grain or currently have any supplements or medications? And then you want to look into those and see, can I afford the medication or the grain that they're on? So routine things that I wouldn't be scared away by if I was looking at a horse that you can expect might be okay to do would be things like a grain supplement in addition to hay. Different types of oils like wheat germ oil, for example, that can help kind of add some fat if you have a horse that has trouble keeping weight on. Joint supplements, we often use Fluid Flex, but there's others. Some of the gastric support, either grains or supplements if you have a horse with delicate kind of digestion. And some anti-stress supplements, sometimes like Viacalm or something if you have a particularly anxious horse. So I think those are all within reason to expect that a horse might need to be on. If they're mentioning some medications that are more involved, so if anybody says that their horse is on butanediamine, you can't keep horses on that long term. That's not sustainable, and that means there's a bigger problem. So that's a red flag. There are supplements or medications like Equiox, Equine shots that can help manage pain from certain conditions from minor lameness. But you want to be careful that those aren't being used to mask any kind of major problem. So again, that's where that PPE, that vet exam would come in. And you want to make sure, again, that that's within your lifestyle, having to administer medications or have your vet give shots, that's something you're willing to take on. But sometimes, I say, depending on your goals, minor lameness may not be something necessarily to completely shine away from. You can give a horse a good home that way. If you don't know what something is, if somebody mentions a supplement or a grain or medication, check with your vet before you purchase that horse so that you know what you're really getting into. And then make sure that your comfort level is okay with doing that. I'm going to say it again, even though we said it already, but ponies shouldn't be on any of those rich foods, things like alfalfa grain or being free pasture, because that puts them at risk of founder and insulin resistance. So if you go to meet a pony and the owner says, oh yeah, they're eating alfalfa and grain, and that's what happened to the pony whose slides you saw, the x-rays, is that pony was kept on alfalfa or it was an alfalfa mix and grain, so rich food really contributed to that cause. So that would be a red flag if you're looking at a pony. All right, next slide.
So all horses have different temperaments, and temperaments are a little bit more of like your horse's personality. There's a lot of ways that we use to classify temperaments. A lot of sites will use a 1 through 10 scale, with 1 being very lazy and 10 being energetic. You know, that's pretty simplified, but it's a way to be like, okay, I want more whoa than go. So you might look at horses like 1 through 4, or I want more go than whoa. So you might look at the higher indexes around 7 and 8. But it doesn't really tell you a whole lot about how that go is, or how that whoa is. Are they lazy but they're actually impossible to move forward and you'll have a walking forever horse? So this is just one. I'm not advocating or not advocating for Pirelli at all, but I do like kind of his way of classifying temperament. And what he does is he has kind of the extroverted half. And so these are the horses that tend to be higher energy, more go, quick. They like to run. And then you have the introverted half. And these are horses that are more whoa, they're slower, they have more tendency to stop, they're more chill. And then you have right-brained, and these horses are more submissive, they're not very confident, they really, really need a leader. And then you have your left-brained horses who are the make me, show me that I need to be listening to you. So my horse is a left-brained introvert. She is stubborn. She is very much make me, and if she doesn't respect who you are and what you bring to the table, then she's gonna go eat grass, and there's nothing you can do to change her mind. And most horses, fit in a different amount. They'll have aspects of all of these traits probably, but more than others. One of the horses that I work with at the rescue, Fennec, she's very, very, very submissive. To the point where she used to not want to be around any horses at all because she was just really bullied. And she's an extremely submissive horse. She'll submit to the pony. She'll submit to a cow. She'll submit to a goat. It doesn't matter. She's out of there. But she is also, fairly calm. She doesn't she has her moments, but she thinks through things, and so I'd probably put her in the right brain introvert. Whereas we have Paris, who is probably going to be maybe the right brain extrovert. I don't think she's super dominant. So she's a little bit more submissive. She's not very confident, but she also just has a ton of energy. So she really needs a handler that's willing to support her through that and be like, no, you're okay. Everything's okay. Look to me. We got this. I'm your thunder buddy. But remember that horses will always behave differently in different stressful situations. So you might think that you have this calm, docile little horse, and then you bring it to a horse show and you're like, what is this? I have a horse kite. So when you bring your horse home at first, give them time to settle down and time to work in, and you might need more than one meeting to understand a horse's temperament. You will need more than one meeting, but you might need more than one meeting to decide if that horse's temperament and yours are compatible. So behavior, unlike temperament, behavior is more of a result of handling and training. So behavior shows a little bit more of like fear or aggression or, something that's they've learned to do through their interactions with other horses or usually their interactions with people. Common vices you will probably see while you're looking for horses include cinchy, which is a horse that doesn't like the girth being tightened around them. And they may bite, they may kick. Some horses lay down. I've met one of those. Pawing. So a lot of horses paw when tied or when standing. They get impatient. Pulling when tied, where a horse pulls back against the tie post. Pushy, where a horse does not respect your space. They might run over the top of you, maybe not to be mean, but just because they've never been taught that they need to stay out of the human's bubble. Bad to bridle. They could rear or they could just put their head up a little bit. I had one person tell me that their horse was bad to bridle, and it was just because you had to stick, usually you stick your thumb in their mouth for them to open, and they thought that was bad to bridle. So, there's a whole scale of all of these. Biting, bad ground manners, bucking, rearing, bolting under saddle, hard to catch, where if you walk into the pasture and the horse goes, nah. So that's more of a hard to catch horse, in contrast to the horse that meets you at the gate and they're like, I'm ready. Kicky, most horses can be kicky horses if pushed far enough, but that's probably a horse that has a tendency to resort to that behavior to express their feelings. Bloating, where you tighten a horse's girth and they may hold in a bunch of air so that when you get on, they can go, whew, that's a nice loose girth. And then you go like this. So cribbing is where a horse will grab a hold of, they'll chew on wood, but they'll also grab a hold of wood and like swallow air. And what that does is it releases dopamine, but it can also cause things like ulcers and stomach aches, colic. So cribbing isn't good. There's ways that you can, get cribbing collars and help the horse not crib. Horses also crib sometimes due to mineral deficiencies. And then wind sucking is where they do it without grabbing onto the wood. They just swallow air. And it's actually an addictive behavior for the horses. And it tends to be, what I've found is it's a way for them to relieve anxiety. So we see a lot of horses with these behaviors because they've been through very anxious and very stressful situations in their life before they came to the rescue. Weaving it's usually horses that are stalled for long periods of times, and they'll just go to the front of their stalls or gate and they'll just go back and forth. All right, next. Training. So green, we kind of talked about this, has a different definition for every equestrian, but usually means a horse that's in the beginning stages of riding. If you do find this, make sure to ask the owner what they actually mean by green. Finished is another general term, but typically used for a horse that has several years of riding and probably a specialty. Finished rope horse, finished reiner, finished jumper. Soft and supple is a horse that isn't too bracy, and you pick up on the rein, they're nice and soft, they bend in. More woe is a horse that you're going to have to encourage for more movement. They're going to be more of a push style, whereas more go, you might have to hold them back. You might have to manage that energy in different ways. Another thing to remember is what methods were used to train this horse, because the training is the language that the horse has been taught to speak. right? So if I'm buying a horse that's only been taught to speak Japanese and I don't know how to speak Japanese, we're going to have a little bit of a rocky start. It doesn't mean that we can't get there, but if the training that that horse has is not the same thing that I've been trained and the training that I use, our communication is going to be a little rough in the beginning, and we're just going to have to be patient with each other. What equipment have they been using? So saddle scars show evidence of an ill-fitting saddle, and that's usually white marks on the withers. And what type of bit are they using? Another good question is, do they have the training to actually use that bit properly, especially in the Western world? Are they used to other training aids like martingales, spurs, crops, etc.? If you have a horse that's always consistently ridden with a martingale and they may or may not have been trained to use it correctly, they can develop the wrong muscles, but they also can have some adverse behaviors when you take it off. Do they know how to line up to a mounting block? This might be important if you plan on only mounting from a mounting block and you may not want to train it yourself or may not know how. And then, do they have the extent of training that you're looking for? Most importantly, is this horse's language that they're speaking compatible with what you speak? Next.
Thank you. We haven't really referred to it so far, but in your folder there is a packet. You don't necessarily have to get it out if you don't want to, but at the very back of the packet there is a handy dandy checklist that kind of goes through a summary of a lot of what we've been talking about here, just to kind of remind yourself and keep yourself on track with what you're looking for. So some things to ask yourself: does the horse fit in your best fit worksheet? So you just filled out all those goals and your time and your fitness. Is it a match for you? Does it fit within what you feel like you need and can handle? As Brittany talked about, budgets, is the horse's cost, the upfront cost, and the cost of their diet, any supplements they need, medications and so on, is all of that within your budget? So you want to stay within your budget. Will the horse's routine fit your lifestyle? So if this horse needs medication twice a day, can you go out to give it to them, or can you find somebody who can? Or if this horse, if you did decide to get a green horse, can you be out there 3 or 4 times a week to ride them, regardless of season? Are you comfortable with all of the horse's habits and quirks? It's so easy to be like, oh, but they're the right size and they're so pretty and I like these things about them, but there may be some deal breakers in terms of their habits and vices and quirks. And so you want to make sure that all of that package that's coming to you you're comfortable with. Are you prepared to hire a trainer or take lessons or attend workshops and clinics if there's a gap there? Do you have that commitment? And then the big one for me is, what does your gut say? I really do believe in this. All of those things said, when it came to choosing our horses, we went a little against some of this, I think, in every case. So the first horse that we got through the rescue, this 20-year-old Arabian mare, and I was like, well, she's older, I don't know how long she's going to be with us, and she really only has the basic training. What it ended up being was she was a really good fit for my daughter, right? I wanted a family horse we could all ride, but the fit, that was too much to ask for in one horse. Advanced horse that I could ride along with a beginner horse that was great for my daughter. So I went with her gut. And we got this horse, and she's been amazing, and I haven't regretted it a minute since. And she's been able to learn those skills, and the more I talked to the rescue, and the more I realized that age was less of a factor there. She is an Arabian, so she is going to probably go a little longer. My horse, I was looking for a step-up horse now for the daughter who that could be a step-up horse. And I was like, I don't like Arabians. I don't like working with them. I had this one bad experience once, right? But I'd been working with him, training him, and he's a pain in my butt. But I love him, and it came time to put him up for adoption. And I was just like, I can't do it. I love working with this horse. So this past whatever roadblock I had about what it was in my head that Arabians were, he's not a super Arabian. He just happens to be very green. And that's been a fun journey to be on. So I went with my gut there, and I've been happy. So this latest one, it remains to be seen, but I am a big believer in guts. I don't go too far outside what you've identified that you want and need, because you don't want to run into trouble. But I think it's okay to go out and see a horse and be like, it's just, it meets my worksheet, but it's just not there. I think that's valid. But also give yourself time to grow into a connection as well. So there's a give and take. Next slide. So questions to ask the seller, just as a review here, make sure you know what they've been eating. If you see any irregularities in their gait and the way that they're moving, ask about them. Ask all the questions. Don't be timid about asking sellers questions. They need to be able to answer you straight, and you need to know what you're getting. What is their history of illness and injury so far as they know? Are they up to date on vaccines, dewormer, their Coggins test? I think I actually added in here later, but their teeth float, because that can be an important factor in terms of their diet and their general well-being. So you want to make sure that they've been cared for through their life. And if they haven't, that you're willing to step up and fill that gap there. When was their last farrier trim? And how do they stand for the farrier? You want to ask them that. Sometimes they can be good when you're picking up their feet, and then the farrier comes in and they're not. So you want to know all that in advance and make sure they're getting that regular care. Otherwise, it can lead to suspicions of, is there any laminitis, because they've only gotten a farrier trim once a year. Training, how much have they had? Who did it? Was it the owner themselves? You can ask about that process. Did they send them out? What kind of methods did they use? Behavior traits and personality quirks that the owner knows about, or the seller. They'll be the ones that you notice, but you want to make sure that they're telling you about all the ones they know about as well. Ownership history, were they the first owner? Did they get them from somebody? What do they know about that past, if anything? Until you get more experience, you may not be able to judge weight and height. So if they have those figures already, that can be really handy for you to make sure that you're staying within size that works for you. And this one's super important. Does the owner have a current brand inspection? This is a legal document. You cannot move a horse or take possession of a horse without this. What's that? If your state requires it. But Wyoming does. No.
Which I'll go into.
Okay, yep. So that'll be him. Sorry. And I think that's you now, right? Oh, nope, sorry, red flag. So a couple things just to be aware. If you see something that doesn't match up, if the owner is telling you something and you're seeing something different, that's a red flag, right? Or if you ask about something and the explanation doesn't satisfy you or doesn't really cover what you were asking about. Lameness that an owner claims just happened or is temporary. Don't take their word for it. This is where you need that vet check. We have seen this happen where somebody said, oh yeah, that it just comes and goes, or it's just temporary. And then we bring them onto the rescue. It's like, no, that's a permanent problem. So be careful with this one. A horse that appears out of it, sometimes, and I have a friend that this happened to, an owner may drug a horse to mask problems that it's having. So for other reasons that lethargy or being out of it, this one would be a red flag for me. There may be other reasons, but that would be a potential problem. And then if you have a seller, especially through Facebook, that's asking for a deposit, that's usually a scam. You should be able just to go and see the horse and pay for it up front. So that's usually them trying to get your money. All right.
All right, so you found your dream horse and you're ready to take it home. So what you'll need is a brand inspection. And there are certain states that are brand inspection states. Make sure you know whether yours is or not. But Wyoming is, Colorado is, California is not. And so it's just if your state requires a brand inspection for your horse. And the brand inspector, typically after the sale, and the owner will present their brand inspection. The brand inspector will go, yes, you own the horse. You're selling it to this at this address. Okay. And they will sign it over. And it costs a different amount of money depending on the state where you live in. There are different types of brand inspections. So there's like annuals. There's just proof of ownership where you cannot actually get out of the county with only a proof of ownership. With the annual, you have to renew it every year, or you can get a lifetime, and that covers your horse wherever you want to take it in the United States for the lifetime of the horse. It just shows proof of ownership, that you own it, where the horse belongs. And then a Coggins is a test for equine infectious anemia, and that is a very deadly disease that equines can get. So Coggins is just a yearly test that they can run. show that your horse is clean. Some states do require for frequent Coggins tests, such as requires a 6-month. So just make sure you know what the rules and requirements are in your state. Health certificate is also required for crossing stands, and this is typically good for 30 days. And it's just the vet comes out, takes the horse's temperature, listens to their heart, and says, "Yep, no pig snot. This horse is in good health. Should be good to travel." You may have an adoption contract depending on how you got your horse. Rescues, some private sales also require an adoption contract and what the previous owner wanting. And then you can there's different hauling companies you can contact or transport it yourself. Once your horse is home, if there's any at all worry about the horses that horse has come in contact with in the past 3 to 4 weeks, it's a good idea to consider a period of at least 3 weeks from other equines, just to make sure they're not bringing infectious diseases to your other horses, and give them some grace for adjusting into their new environment. It's got to be a pretty scary experience.